An ancient Egyptian man entombed in a ceramic pot more than 4,500 years ago has just revealed a genetic link across the cradles of civilization. Around 2855 to 2570 BCE, the early Old Kingdom of Egypt was emerging. Pharaohs built pyramids, hieroglyphs were used, and Egypt's power was consolidating. In the limestone cliffs near the village of Nuwayrat, also Nuwayrat, about 265 kilometers south of modern Cairo, archaeologists discovered a rock-cut tomb. Inside lay a plain ceramic pot, sealed inside the tomb, containing the carefully interred remains of a man. His skeleton, knees drawn up, had rested for millennia until modern science came calling. Excavated between 1902 and 1904 by a British-led team, the tomb at Nuwayrat yielded this pot burial among several others. Carbon dating places the man's death between 2855 and 2570 Cal BCE, 95.4% probability. This places him in the transition from the early dynastic period into the Old Kingdom, the era when Egypt's monumental pyramids were rising. Hot, arid environments like Egypt's are notoriously bad for preserving ancient DNA, or aDNA. Heat and humidity degrade genetic material over millennia, yet this individual's remains proved an exception. Thanks to the sealed pot burial and rock-cut tomb environment, the DNA was preserved well enough for whole genome sequencing. In a landmark study published in Nature, the research team, including Adeline Merez-Jacobs and many colleagues, reported the first whole genome sequence from an early Egyptian individual. The genome coverage was ×2, sufficient to draw ancestry inferences despite the challenges of preservation. The remains show he was an adult male, likely aged somewhere between 44 and 64 years at death. Dental chemical signatures indicate that he grew up along the banks of the Nile. His burial, in a sealed vessel rather than a large royal tomb, suggests he may not have been a pharaoh, but some individual of status in his community. The context is still under study. The genome reveals that roughly 80% of his ancestry derives from North African Neolithic populations, but approximately 20% of his genetic ancestry traces to the eastern Fertile Crescent, that is, Mesopotamia and neighboring regions. This is surprising because traditional views emphasized Egypt as culturally influenced by neighbors, but not necessarily genetically entwined. The genetic evidence shows that human migration and gene flow were happening far earlier than often assumed in Egypt. The man's ancestry carries a signature of movement, from the Fertile Crescent into the Nile Valley. Archaeologists have long known that ideas, technologies, plants, and animals moved between Mesopotamia and Egypt, but now we have direct human genetic evidence. Around this period, Egypt was importing ideas such as the pottery wheel, writing systems developed, and domesticated animals moved east-west. Trade networks across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East had been operating for millennia. The DNA evidence places human migration on that list of interconnected flows. This single genome suggests a composite ancestry for early Egyptians, primarily local North African, but with inputs from the East. It also challenges simplistic models that treat ancient Egypt as genetically isolated. Instead, the Nile Valley may have been a conduit for movement. The researchers emphasize that this is one individual. They caution against overgeneralizing from a single genome. The DNA record in Egypt is extremely fragmentary. More samples from multiple sites are needed to delineate patterns of population and ancestry across time. Extracting aDNA from Egypt's climate is difficult because high heat and microbial activity degrade DNA over millennia. That this man's remains were sealed in a pot, in a rock-cut tomb, likely aided preservation, providing the rare opportunity for whole genome sequencing. When we consider the great civilizations of the early Bronze Age, Egypt in the Nile Valley, Sumer and Akkad in the Tigris-Euphrates region, This genetic link adds human bodies to the narrative of cultural and economic exchange. It suggests that people moved alongside ideas, goods, and animals, that the boundary between these ancient worlds was porous. We don't know exactly when the admixture occurred, whether generations before the man or further back. We don't know how widespread this kind of Fertile Crescent ancestry was among Egyptians, or whether it was concentrated among certain classes or groups. We don't yet know how the genetic landscape of Egypt evolved in later periods, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, Ptolemaic, or Roman. In sum, a man buried more than 4,500 years ago near Nuwayrat has given us a whole genome. About 80% of his ancestry is North African, 20% from the Eastern Fertile Crescent. This opens a new chapter in our understanding of ancient Egypt's population dynamics. In a land of pyramids built to last forever, this man's DNA reminds us that the real foundation of civilization was people on the move. The story of ancient Egypt was not just stone and sand, it was human connection across continents.